Welcome everybody. I'm JMR. I'll be your host for the next hour. We have here three amazing guests to discuss gaming and how to make it appeal to masses. On my right, please, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Frankie Colamarino. I'm the CEO of Partie. I also own a creative agency called Problem Media. We've serviced everybody from Astro Gaming to Amazon and Twitch on the agency side, and yeah, building a cool little product that helps focus LFG and matchmaking through an application.
Amazing. On his right, we have Carra. Hello.
Hi, I'm Carra. I'm an investing partner at A16Z Crypto. I have a background in math, computer science, and economics from Harvard. Spent a little bit of time as a software engineer building AR, VR apps for the HoloLens team at Microsoft. And then I spent a little bit of time as a product manager at Apple in the App Store, where I worked mostly with game developers, like Candy Crush and Roblox and that sort of thing. I joined A16Z Crypto around 3 years ago now, focusing mostly on the intersection between crypto and games investing. But I also touch other kinds of media and IP, as well as the infrastructure that supports those investments.
Amazing. Thank you for being here. And on her right, Erik. What's up, buddy?
Hey, what's going on, man? Erik Anderson with Faze Clan, esports organization. It's pretty big. If you're familiar with Counter-Strike or Call of Duty, you might know us. I head up, amongst other things, mainly the competitive gaming division of the company. So that's all of our esports titles. I've been around Faze for going on 8 years now. Pretty much built up all our verticals in gaming outside of Call of Duty. And then came from the music industry before that, where we'll probably sprinkle some of that throughout this conversation.
Okay, nice. And about me, very briefly, I used to make films in Hollywood. Then I did gaming, and I was the CEO of OG Esports, one of the biggest esports teams in the world, and it's how I know him. And we put this panel together because we want to have a colorful conversation with 4 people with 4 different backgrounds that works in different sides of the industry, so we can, shed light into how we see the world and see which kind of agreements or conclusions we can come up through this hour of talks. And I'm going to start the questions with you guys with saying, okay, let's identify what is going on right now on gaming. Okay, what is the current state of gaming? So the first question that I have is, what makes a good game, Frankie? A normal game, not a Web3 game, just game.
Well, for me, obviously, my obsession is games like World of Warcraft. Large format games, obviously beautiful ecosystems, beautiful economies, and I think my version of what makes a good game is a little dated. But today, I feel obviously, if I can keep your attention, or if I can help move a story along, or build a brilliant IP, that comes in the form of a publisher, and typically that comes at the form of scale. So I think holding attention is a good part of it. Good marketing, good community collaboration, really is how I see it today.
Okay, but for you, Carra, do we consider a good game when people love the game, when a lot of people play the game, where it makes a lot of money, when it's very successful?
I think it has to mean something.
Okay.
Typically, if the game has cultural significance, people will love it, people will feel invested in it, people will maybe, spend a lot of money in that game. I think it all comes from the context having cultural significance. And I think in order for that to happen, I think these are our principles for all kinds of entertainment, actually. There have to be stakes, there has to be some amount of chaos, and then people have to feel an affinity for it.
Okay.
And I didn't make this framework up. This is something that a lot of the founders that I work with say over and over again. It's there's not enough chaos in this game. I need to create more chaos. People naturally tend toward order. We need to create more entropy. And then stakes, it's if I care enough about this environment, it matters if I win or lose. It matters to my friends, to the people I care about in this game. It matters to my reputation. So yeah, I think it all stems from did you create an IP that was important enough for people to care?
Okay. Erik, for you, what makes it a good game?
I was watching the Nouns guys over on the other stage, and they were Pat mentioned something about just a game needs to be fun, and I think it's a very simple way of kind of addressing it, but it's true. But what's fun for everybody is very, very different. Playing World of Warcraft for however many hours a day you played back is
3 years.
It's not fun
of my
for me
life.
personally.
Let's go.
Right? playing a FromSoft game is not fun for me, right? But at the same time, like, I like playing like spreadsheet games, right? So Civilization, spending hours in that, or Europa Universalis, like that's fun for me. It's probably awful for some other person. So I think something that's fun is the simplified way of doing it. And then obviously in my business, like a platform for competitive play for like iconic moments, like that's, a lot of people probably not having fun, but it's really fun winning, right? And so again, a wide range of what fun can be, but as long as you have that experience, you have, or you can say at the end of it, we had fun doing that.
Okay. So I'm going to add a little bit. For me, what makes a good game is a level of escapism from my current life. For me, the way or how I started playing games, I had a rough childhood, and I needed a place to escape from my life. So these communities and these games were a place where I will find refuge, and where I will find my friends, and where I will find that. So for me, if you're allowing me escapism, and I fully involve myself and immerse in your new world, that works for me.
I'm gonna piggyback on that for a
go.
second. So if you're unfamiliar with Faze Clan, Faze was started like that. Mm-hmm. It was a, it was a Call of Duty collective that basically was focused, they were like the skateboarders of gaming, right? They put together all of these clips of them, sniping clips and trick-shotting clips, and they found each other online. In fact, many of the members didn't meet until year 6 or 7 in person, right? And that's kind of when they started scaling, and a lot of them, it was escapism. It was something to just kind of get down there, play Call of Duty, play the game everybody was playing, meet friends online, meet friends in some other places. The 2 of the founders are from Boston. Like some of the others are from Toronto and Southern California, right? And they just connected based on that. And like I said, didn't meet for years in person. So yes, escapism is a huge thing, for sure.
Yeah.
And community, you mentioned that.
And community,
Sorry to interrupt.
No, please. And on that point, yeah, community for us too, right? Like I met some of my best friends through gaming, right? Whether it be on World of Warcraft. And like the ethos of Partie really is connectivity, bringing people together in a safe environment. And for us, like a lot of that stems even from a competitive level, having a hard time finding people that are worth bringing into those groups to keep it healthy, right? A guild in World of Warcraft is a business at the end of the day. And I think growing into that, like Faze did, is a perfect example of kind of where I see the future of gaming heading, but we'll wait for that.
Okay, well, that's a great segue. So now, Carra, where are we in Web3 gaming? Which part of evolution? Are we still on the monkey side? Are we already walking?
I think people are running a lot of interesting experiments.
Okay.
The outcomes of those experiments remain to be seen. There are a lot of really interesting properties that are unique to Web3, and I think people are aware of what they are. So there's some ownership, there's permissionless composability, there's some level of like programmability and trustlessness. These are all primitives that people understand. And people are running lots of really interesting experiments. Some of them are going to fail. Some things are just going to not be fun. Some things are going to work, some business models are going to work, and some aren't. And I think this has been true of every previous generation of games. When the mobile phone first came out, people tried to apply the same principle of we're going to charge for the game itself, all in one go. And it didn't work well because the whole premise of mobile social gaming is you have a whole community of friends. The game gets better as more people play. So why would you create an adverse selection issue where people have to pay to play, right? It should be free to play. And then you should be able to get add-ons, premiums, subscriptions, skins, right? Things that make the experience better for you as an individual, but don't impede your ability to join. And so that was sort of the evolution of free-to-play games, was the understanding was, okay, this network gets better, this game gets more fun as more people join. So don't gate that action, right? Make it as easy as possible for people to join. And I think people are still experimenting with business models for Web3 games. I don't know that a perfect business model has been found. But typically, these business models are very native to the forum. And applying old business models to new kinds of gaming styles doesn't really work. So I think we're in the primordial soup phase. I think people are still running experiments.
But you sound optimistic. So you think that these experiments will hopefully cathartic moment where, this actually works and crypto gaming starts being appealing to masses.
Yeah, I certainly think some things are working.
Okay.
There are early signs. There's a lot of really interesting play tests. I don't want to hog the stage, but I'm happy to go through examples of stuff that's even been really interesting here at ETHDenver.
Well, we're going to get there later, but if you want to mention a few of them.
I don't know. Some people here might have played Crypto the Game. which we're not an investor in, has never raised money. It was like, they actually have a meetup. Yeah, they've got a meetup here at ETHDenver. And it was just really fascinating. It was like this survivor-style game where in order to play, you have to buy into the pot. You're sorted into a tribe randomly, and people vote you off your island every day. And so it's some amount of like diplomacy style, sort of civilization style, betrayal, and you can make your own smart contracts to say, okay, like I will escrow this money if I don't betray you. But of course, betrayal is the whole point of the game, right? So there was a lot of really interesting stuff happening. And like when I tell you that don't tell my boss this, I like did not work for 3 days. Like the fact that I got eliminated was like a great thing for my job because I was on that game 24/7.
Okay, understand.
Something is working there.
Okay, so for you both, what is your, let's say, temperature check of what's happening right now in Web3 gaming?
I mean, I think that's a really good point about the evolution of like how some of these games make money, right? I mean, you go back in time and you basically just had to go to a store to buy something, right? And eventually kind of stuff went more digital so the friction was removed from having to go to a store. And then these kind of free-to-play games, and even some of these free-to-play games having this depth of like, you know, if you play Counter-Strike, a loot crate mechanic, which is, they're literally hours of, if you know who Oni is, you can watch him just opening loot crates, and that's entertainment for somebody too. So it's like, and it's creating other layers of people making money on Valve making gobs of money. So I think there's probably going to be more experimental things. And actually, I haven't played that, but there's so many amazing board games out there that you could just probably take into the Web3 ecosystem. Now that you're kind of saying that, I'm like, man, I actually want to play a bunch of these board games now in this ecosystem. So I think we're going to see some experiments, and I hope to see more experiments.
Okay.
And changing that up. Wait, I triggered something.
So maybe I have to play devil's advocate to just move the conversation forward, and it's gonna be for you, because I feel that right now, the more Web3 games that I experience are not gamify, are fi gaming. The whole premise started as the financial incentives, tokenization, and all that, and then they were like, okay, well now, how do we make this game fun? So they're not very fun, many of them, because the economy part is the one that they are more expertise on, because making a fun game is really, really hard. You work with the biggest titles in the world and the biggest developers. Yeah. And we mentioned, you may have states, that one of the problems is that these people spend millions and hundreds of millions of dollars and they still fail games. Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit more how you see that?
Well, I mean, there's a few versions of that, right? Like we're seeing it now with like things like the Call of Duty League, where there is certain things that can happen, and there are certain things that the players are at the mercy of, right? Like you can gate an event, you can gate a tournament, you can say we need a license, but ultimately, like I think the future of what Web3 really offers up is collaboration. You know, I love to see a world where open source gaming becomes a version of that, and creators can be built out of the development phase, right? You look at technologies like Blender, which is open source 3D software, and you really see how a community that has the interest to get to the finish line can really kind of rally and get that done. We know what it costs to make a video game today, and that's why I'm so excited to be at ETHDenver and seeing what's happening behind us. I think this is the future of gaming. And you know, for me, like on the brand and agency side, like how do we inject design and consideration and marketing back into this ecosystem, like community builders, and add that layer on top of the development? I think the beauty of everything happening in Web3 on blockchain is the collaborative piece. And like any good industry, the technology needs to get figured out first, so then we can build on top of it. You can't spin a silk shirt unless you figured out a machine that can farm silk.
Okay.
Right? So we're experiencing that at hackathons, with ETHDenver, with projects like Nouns, right? Where, you know, we're here because we want to be here. And that's what I see the future of Web3 gaming turning into. I think what makes games fun is amazing, but the work has to get done before the fun can come, right? So it is primordial soup. It is very much a hot pot, as Pat would say.
Okay. So you guys mentioned something very interesting, because Carra mentioned that in a way, the IP has a huge value, because the IP is in a way the transformative part. The people align themselves, and that will be the thing that penetrates society. But now you're mentioning that, okay, well, all the technology, all the ecosystem, and everything that has to work, it also has to be on the back end of that. And then to you, which you have one of the biggest communities in gaming, how does the community part start appealing to Web3 gaming? Because right now I feel that Web3 gaming is appealing to Web3 people and is trying to captivate this audience before it goes out to try to get it mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just kind of want to comment about the communities and how to engage with. Oh, can you hear me better now?
Much better.
So I think right now there hasn't been a game, at least to our community, there hasn't been a game that's penetrated into the Faze Clan or Faze Clan adjacent ecosystem. And I think when a game pops up that people are really into, I think you'll see the community kind of bite onto it quickly. I would say the last big moment that happened around our community was Fortnite dropping. And that was like for our guys, that was a Modern Warfare 2, which to them was like the greatest game of all time. That was like a moment like that. And the question is a moment like that going to come? And there's other games in between, right, that have captured their attention. Rainbow Six is having Siege is having a moment right now. Jinxie is like driving it forward and really raising attention to a really great, balanced, incredible esport title, right? And by the way, this is from the perspective of an esport specific title, right? So I think if there's a game that's made that can tap into that community, the community will jump on it rapidly, immediately, right? Like you can't force it onto them. You can't say, hey, this game's amazing. No, the community will tell you whether they think it's amazing. I mean, look at Helldivers 2 is having a moment right now where the whole gaming community in general is just loving it. And so it's like, and I don't know if they expected that game to do that or not, but it's definitely there. So I think for our community specifically, you can try to force things into it, but they're going to immediately, they'll shoot up and spit it back out if they don't like it.
Okay. So now a question for you, Carra. Let's just think about it. What is the main challenge that you think that Web3 gaming has to overcome to appeal to the general masses?
I still think it's an infrastructure thing. Infrastructure advancements have always led to changes in computing paradigms. So like you couldn't have MMOs without, well, you couldn't have global MMOs without really sophisticated distributed systems architecture, right? You couldn't have this sort of super casual social gaming, free-to-play in-app purchase game without mobile phones. And so, you know, when infrastructure starts to mature, it makes it possible for not only new kinds of consumer experiences, but a lot of different kind of developer experiences. And I think like what's happening right now is like blockchain scalability and compute is just starting to get to the point where like even for a developer, there weren't very many layers of abstraction before. There weren't a lot of libraries of like game engines, simply because you had to program everything in a hyper-optimized, almost like bare metal assembly, you know, bit packing way. In order for like really interesting creatives, new categories of developers to like get interested in building games on blockchains, you have to have libraries that are accessible to them. You have to have engines. You have to have, you know, easy-to-use frameworks. And we're just starting to get to the point where really interesting open-source frameworks are becoming available in the same way that React changed the game for JavaScript. So I really think it's like a time game.
Okay, that's a great answer. Frankie, for you, nowadays, what would these games have to do to be able to compete with the other ones? Because I understand what Carra says. These games are going to get gradually better. Yeah. But the other ones are also getting gradually better. So when I am just sitting at home and I'm choosing a form of entertainment, why or can the other ones compete with them?
My answer is going to be a little bit more simple, I think. Honestly, like I think foundationally we're getting there. Like it's technology before the cosmetic, right? Like I think what we're seeing now is more like prom, where you have boys on one side, you have girls on the other. And like brands also need to start to trust Web3 a little bit more, right? Like I think there is a world where Faze Clan doesn't need to wait for a Web3 game to come out. They can create one, right? And the kind of strategy around that for me would be, well, let's focus on the cosmetics on my side, and obviously we'll help with development, but I got to believe in you enough to want to meet you in the middle, right? And I think that a lot of the games that are doing well in Web3 are doing really well. There are some really good games out there that would make absolute sense for Faze Clan, but I think they haven't figured out the prom kind of conundrum, right? So for me, like, it is about opening up the kind of design and brand market a little bit more, like allowing for even brands like a Nike to want to own a game and a category with a team like Faze. You know, I'm a firm believer in even like AI essentially progressing past Web3 and all that in the sense of like figuring out the mechanisms where Faze Clan can spin up an AI game and just cast it. Let's watch a bunch of marbles race down a pipe. And you know, we're moving toward a casting culture, right? That is what the creator economy is looking to do. I can tell you from talking to Ninja personally, Ninja does not want to play video games for 14 hours a day, right? So the casting and kind of content and React content and podcast content that's coming, like, is allowing for a very good grace period for gaming to say, if we don't get our together, like, gaming might just phase itself out and we just might move past gaming to content. Maybe it's more interesting to watch marbles race and talk about it than it is to actually build these systems. I personally am on the side of incubating gaming. I think gaming has done a lot for me socially. And as we move into a world where we're leaving the house more, gaming really does offer that social tool. There are people who shouldn't be in a room together behind us who met because of the internet. And that's the direction we're heading in.
That's a great segue. Because for you, Erik, the question is, at the end of the day, for me, as I mentioned at the beginning, is escapism and community. I need to meet people that I enjoy playing the game, and that's why I end up playing the game. So the reason why I might play in a specific game is because my friends played that game. So we all kind of move together to new games. So how would Web3 gaming approach the community building aspect that you guys so successfully have done?
So, I mean, I'll speak it specifically to esports. And I'd say, like, I think one of the most amazing things, if you can build a platform for people to have fun together, again, where Helldivers 2 is doing right now, I think is super, super important. But I think from a competitive standpoint, if you're going to pick a lane, I guess, or like, let's say you want to try to tackle esports via a fighting game or via first-person shooter, just understand too that, like, it's not easy to make a balanced competitive game. Like, I'll use tennis as a perfect example as a sport. I think it's a beautifully balanced game. You play on one side, then you flip side, and you play the exact same way. Football, soccer, basketball, simple, simple, simple. Counter-Strike, honestly, really simple game with a lot of depth of, what's that famous expression? Easy to learn, hard to master. Actually, kind of a hard game to learn, hard to master. But, if you're going to be jumping into those kind of things, really understanding balance and tweaking that, and it's kind of complicated. So I don't necessarily know if I jump into esports first, but it is a way to...
Esport is right after this.
That's cool. But it is a way to get an immediate organic growth of a community, right? And I think that's something that speaks to our core community. They want to get out their competitive nature, right? And that's that core audience. And then there's somebody else, and it wasn't really me, but loved playing The Sims. I mean, that game, that IP made so much money. And so making something like that to benefit those people, to share them with the rest of the community, whatever they made, I think you can go after that as well. So picking a lane.
So we're going to have a segment about esports, but I'm actually going to bring it right now because we're talking about it. A lot of the times when people start thinking about gaming and they think, oh, we need to make it sticky, we need to get the community to like it, they always think about esports. And I think it's actually one of the biggest challenges, or I'm not going to call it mistakes, but it's a unique direction because it's extremely hard to make a game become an esports. There's fantastic titles, and very few of them become successful esports.
Well, it's one of the issues we talked about before. You basically need to make a free-to-play game because you want as many people in there as possible, so your costs are going to skyrocket just to keep it. And if you don't bring the community in and scale it and figure out a way to monetize it, you're going to have a bad time. So I think I don't recommend going after esports first. And I also don't know the limitations of the technology specifically. But
why would people want esports? Because esports obviously drive stickiness, it drives community, it drives retention. The more people that play the game, you actually want to know who the best guy is.
Yeah.
So that's why you kind of have to create the gladiator arena of go there and fight it out.
Totally. So I think esports, for anybody that's unfamiliar, it's that layer right on top of multiplayer, right? That really is kind of like a battle arena showcase for the best of the best of the best, right? And I think that there's something that we love as humanity, to see the best of somebody do something. Everything from NBA championships or the Olympics to I guess the best spreadsheet developers in the world, right? Because the Excel championship gets bigger and bigger every year. So
Is that a real thing?
it is a real thing.
Okay.
Phase spreadsheets coming.
Spreadsheet.
What's that?
Phase
heard it here.
spreadsheets coming.
Phase
Web3
spreadsheets,
is
exactly.
spreadsheet game.
Or
I have
tag
a lot to
is
say
another
about
one.
spreadsheets, but continue.
That's awesome. Well, we can separate into that. It's a
Tune in
separate
next
segment.
week for the spreadsheet gaming episode.
Yeah, and even the rock climbing documentary, which I cannot watch because I'm like getting clammy thinking about that documentary. But like it's the best of the best doing it.
I think that's the key.
Yeah.
I think esports drives emotions in a
Yes.
different way. So I grew up, so we both run esports teams. And for me, the esports events and the esports community is more like a town hall of people that went there with one shared love, one point of passion. And we're now all creating a community with people that we cannot play the game at that level, but we enjoy watching it. So I don't watch football at home. I don't watch NBA at home. I'm watching 16-year-old play video games around the world.
Yeah.
So it has
it's amazing.
a very unique component.
And if you've never seen it in person, it's something else. But also, if you just get a chance, go online and watch some of the great moments. I think the International has some of those moments where you just see this roars of the crowd. It's like watching, they won twice. It's like watching traditional sports when you get those moments, right? Like, honestly, I think football in Europe or Latin America have like a really powerful audience. I think actually we're some of the worst fans in North America, relatively speaking. It's just like another level. Go watch Katowice for Counter-Strike, it's amazing. So I think it's that live entertainment aspect. And if you can build a platform that then brings people and piles them on, I will also tell you too that you will have the most game testers ever giving you immediate feedback, most of which you probably won't like on Twitter X, so just keep that in mind as well.
Okay, so we're gonna macro again. So we're gonna just build these little bricks during these conversations. So we talk about the technology, having to catch up in order to be able to make those amazing games. The esports parts that we were talking about, they are gonna make some of the most memorable connections to the game. It's gonna happen on those moments of cathartic, just like the Game 7 of the NBA, for me, is one of those moments in video games. We've talked about brands and how brands need to start interacting with this. We talk about studios and about developers. Okay, this is really good and it's very important. But now the question for you, Carra, is when we start thinking about what games should we support, what games should we finance, what games should we just think that they have the best chance to succeed? How do we go about it?
Yeah, so as a venture investor, and this is not transferable to every kind of investing, we think about new markets getting created. So for us, the best opportunities are markets not where you're stealing market share from other existing markets, but totally new markets, right? Like bringing in a whole new fold of gamers. So when mobile gaming came out, hardcore console gamers were like, those aren't real gamers, they're playing Candy Crush. But now mobile gaming is like the second biggest category, right? So it's one of these things where, as a venture investor, and maybe this isn't true for all investors, I just look at like, is there something really novel about this game mechanic or this way of organizing people or this way of bringing people into the fold that will create an entirely new market? And with crypto, my hope is that you get a lot more modding and a lot more composability. There's a lot more builders able to get invested in like building whole worlds, whole businesses in these games that are really rich, that they couldn't build because they were worried in other game platforms of platform risk. There's a reason now why people don't build businesses on top of closed social networks anymore. People tried to do this in the early days of like building businesses on Twitter APIs and on the Facebook APIs, and then one by one they got cannibalized by the platform themselves, and now developers know better than to build their lives on quicksand. And so once you have these sort of like free market components, these ownership components, and like some sort of credible guarantee of like neutrality of the platform, my hope is that you start to see like new kinds of participation, new kinds of players, right? Players that are building, some spreadsheet min-maxers. Like I think whole new categories of gamers will hopefully emerge in the same way that we got just like new casual gamers in the mobile era. So I think like one, as an investor, are they doing something super native? Are they doing something that feels new, that isn't just what we call skeuomorphic, porting an old principle or an old game loop on top of a new technology. So I think that's number one. The other one is for, especially because games are a hit-driven business, I think this is probably similar to how publishers evaluate, film franchises and evaluate music deals. Is there a proven ability to execute on behalf of the team? So, like in the early stages, the only thing that remains consistent across the investment that you're making is the people who are leading that team, right? Companies will pivot. The core thesis of the game will change. You're going to go through lots of different playtests and vertical slices. And really what you're betting on is like the operator's ability to execute. And the number one way to de-risk that is to choose people who have successfully run games in the past. So that's sort of how I think about the earliest stages of investing. And then sort of as you get to later stages, like sort of Series B, Series C, and beyond, you start to look for traction, some sort of sign that something is working. Because if you only go for teams, and if you only go for things that are on thesis, you might miss something that like nobody expected. Like Stardew Valley was made by like one guy for like 6 years. He made the entire soundtrack by himself. Like that kind of, sort of moonshot, 1 in a million thing, like you don't want to miss as an investor, but if you use just like the principles of like, de-risked team execution, you're not going to find that person. And so in the later stages, we try to think about correcting our mistakes by looking at stuff that's actually working. And the number one way to do that is to look at traction.
Okay, that's a fantastic answer. I think that when we start thinking about how we were going to frame this panel, the idea was to be able to convey as many usable, actionable information for anybody that is listening. And this is really great. Frankie, for you, you come more from, you built this company called Partie.
Yes.
Okay. Partie, I think you probably explain it better than me, but it's a community that you're building that creates a matchmaking engine and a social component to gaming outside of the confinement of the titles and the game itself that connects across all of them.
Yeah, we just want to broker the interaction. If you're not good at Valorant, say, hey, I'm not that good, I'm looking to learn, right? Like any good product, I think you really have to start community first, solve a problem, right? And I think that the way I look at even my time spent building Partie, like I serviced Partie like a client, which I think was the smartest thing for me to do. And I think other companies that do that really well are companies like Epic Games and Fortnite. Fortnite is not hiring people to figure out their strategy. They built one of the greatest engines in the world to do that for them. They can go from save the world and then a weekend later say, we need a battle royale, and spin that up and have it become one of the most successful moves that you can make. I personally believe a lot of this comes down to how nice everyone's willing to play, right? This is a global problem outside of gaming. Like, if I want to see you succeed, I will help you to succeed in areas, but you got to meet me here, right? Like, I think a lot of good games that have died in Web3 have died because nobody met them in the middle. And I feel the same way about a lot of good games out there now. No Man's Sky was one of those examples. If you're familiar with No Man's Sky, horrible launch, great kind of nosedive pull out of the trees for them, right? But like the community, and when we talk about having human feedback, like gaming is still under a lot of hostility when it comes to indie devs. They want it today, they want it perfect. That is an entitlement that has been kind of commercialized in gaming, right? That has, give it to me now. Nobody knows how hard it is to build a game, nobody knows how hard it is to build a product. Me having the background of servicing clients, and I think Epic is way grander scale, but they were a service before they were Fortnite. People don't realize that as an engine. So like, how do we support the engines of Web3? How do we bring in brand? How do we bring in marketing? Where does Nike say, I'm Team New Balance Gaming coming soon, by the way. You heard it here first. So yeah, but like a lot of that comes down to how nice everybody's willing to play. And the prom analogy comes back here, right? Where Nike doesn't know how to vet a game that's coming up, right? And I think we do that well even with the Amazon partnership that Partie has. If you know, Partie is the only technology on Prime Gaming, and everything else is publisher. It's game, it's in-game currency, it's cosmetics. So for us, like we focused on the hardest part, which was the matchmaking experience. I play Valorant once, I never want to play that game again because of the interactions I had. That's why 40,000 people are watching 40,000 people play it instead of playing it themselves. And that's kind of where I want to, run parallel to a platform like Twitch. How do we say, you want to play with Ninja or you want to play with Banks? We're going to broker the deal, right?
Okay.
Matchmaking is the important piece for us.
So I think that again, when we started conceptualizing how will this panel go, what I thought it was very interesting about you, Frankie, and about your company, is that most people think Web3 gaming, let's build a game. Well, I think there is an immense opportunity of build adjacent businesses to the main game that allows blockchain technology to be integrated in a very seamless and great way.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, of course, it's for you.
So the one thing I've learned about blockchain, having worked with clients like OpenSea specifically, at your best, even with the backing of the greatest partners on planet Earth, some people just shouldn't run a business. It's just that easy. And I'm seeing that here, and again, that's where I want to offer my time, my energy, my service. I know what I'm good at, and a lot of people are scared of that. And I embrace it. I love chaos. I'm somebody who literally needs to be in the gauntlet on fire every day. And you know what I'm talking about. So, for us, that stress, really isn't for everybody. And I think a lot of people just like to build, right? So how do we lift that up as people who can become operators, maybe in a sense, or just don't want to be? I've seen a lot of games abandoned, both in Web 2, and this is my problem with the Web 3 term when we talk about Web 3 gaming. I think that word has scared a lot of people over the years, especially with a lot of the...
We have to rebrand Web3 gaming and crypto
but
altogether.
Not really, right? Technology is always scary when it comes out. Designers thought Photoshop was going to kill them. DJs thought CDJs was going to kill them. And all it did was make it better, right? So, and you know that as a filmmaker, right? So that's kind of where I think things are moving. Gaming's got to get collaborative again.
Okay. So then I have a great segue. So Carra and I had a conversation off stage before, and it was like you open a whole window to a whole different dimension of gaming that I didn't understand, which is user-generated content. And you believe that this is one of the most exciting parts of what Web3 could allow? Can you tell me a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so sort of the way I sort of started talking about this when I was talking about the guarantees that a platform offers you and the credible neutrality of that platform. I think I'm going to draw kind of a stretch of analogy and just bear with me here. The best, most innovative, the most stable economies in the world are based off of free market economies. And it seems you can build a sort of closed market economy or a state-owned or state-managed economy in the short term. But ultimately, the most interesting things, the most interesting businesses, the most interesting art, all come out of economies that are open. And I think in games like RuneScape and in World of Warcraft and in just MMOs broadly, you start to see inklings of interesting user-generated content. You start to see people making their own servers. You start to see people using sort of RuneScape gold coins as replacements for national currencies during hyperinflationary regimes like the Bolivar in Argentina in 2008. But ultimately, that is constrained by the platform risk. RuneScape can take away your gold at any moment in time. Minecraft can shut down your server. There's no incentive for you to start that server because there's no value being exchanged. You're just doing it for the clout. You're just doing it because you love it. But imagine if there were incentives attached to it. Imagine if you knew that you owned your server. Imagine if you could know that building a business on top of RuneScape gold was something that nobody could rug you on. And so I think that in order for us to achieve the most fascinating, the richest, the most interesting virtual world, in order for a metaverse that is exciting and that people can feel is new and not dystopian to emerge, I think it has to be built on crypto rails. I think it has to be built on guarantees. And so that's what I mean when I say I think this will lead to the most fascinating explosion in user-generated content on the internet, just because you have 3D space, you've got interesting fidelity, you've got stories, you have all the components for a context that matters and that is already rich. And then you add in sort of ownership principles, and I think you can get the most interesting stuff that we can't even imagine today.
Okay. Erik, I see you ready.
Well, I mean, look, my whole ecosystem or 80% of it is built on the back of effectively user-generated content, right? Oh, sorry, user-generated content. So like Counter-Strike is a mod. It's a Half-Life mod, right? Defense of the Ancients.
Dota.
Original, yeah, Warcraft 3 mod. So like in two of the biggest games in the world, and that's split off into League of Legends and to pretty much every other MOBA that's out there. And so I think 100%, and there've been, the esports world has been kind of sitting on the backs of this relationship with publishers, but also a situation where the publishers can pull those rights back at any point, and they have. And it's created the opportunity to generate businesses, but also businesses shutting effectively overnight that the community loved. And it was a huge bummer. And I think there's an opportunity to come out the gates and say, hey, look, these are open for people to build businesses. And up front, we're going to tell you, hey, we're the game developer. We're going to just make the game. Honestly, Valve's probably the most open with it. And I think they've done the best with regards to putting certain restrictions. I speak to that from the Counter-Strike side. I can't speak to that from the Dota side. And I think that opportunity is here to just kind of like hit the ground running, and then people feel somewhat safe as they build those businesses.
Yeah, and I will say, when you're not constrained by like APIs, and when you're not constrained by like what the publisher or the developer or the world builder gives you, when it's Turing complete and you can write your own smart contracts, you can create your own clients, you get like way more expressivity. You can get way more high complexity stuff. And I think that just like increases the dimensionality of like what gaming can be or what a virtual world can be.
This is amazing. We have 8 minutes and 45 seconds. Don't look at the clock, look at me. But I think it's starting to sum up and to wrap some of the big topics. I have to say, I had a very different feeling and understanding of Web3 gaming that changed a week ago. And the way that I'm starting to think about some of the things that you guys are thinking, now I'm really buying into this. Because I was running guilds and raids for World of Warcraft. But I had no stake on the game. I had no ownership of the game. I contribute directly to the benefit of the ecosystem, me and many other people that were doing guides, videos, tutorials, and nobody of us had any stake on the game. In Dota, we were one of the biggest contributors of the success of the game as well, and we don't own anything of the game. So now what you're saying is that we get to partake in many different versions, creating pools for contributors, and sort of like a layer 2 on a game where we get to build the layers 2s, we get to monetize it, other people get to build the ecosystem. Okay, there is something here. I can tell you there is something here. Because I believe that the hardcore gamers that I know are willing to play a game that is maybe 20% inferior at the beginning, with the chance that now that I will help you build it, then I can take ownership of that. There's something really special here.
Yeah, and like that's kind of how I think when I talk about even skipping over the publisher, right? Like this will be easy enough in the next 2 years, mark my words, for Faze Clan to spin up a game and to skin an economy and to take open source technology. Erik doesn't know this yet, but we're already talking to Yoni about doing this with Faze and bringing AI in to build those systems. So like for us, you know, allow the casters, allow the commentators, allow the creators to do what they're good at, but also build a game that is fitting for their community, right? Like there will be a first-person shooter engine available for Faze Clan that is premier in the next 2 years. It's gonna happen. So like my advice for anybody building in the Web3 space is don't worry about the publisher mafia, right? That is going to exist in any space. That's going to exist in fashion. We've seen it in music. And people break off and they go to SoundCloud. And people break off and they screen print their own t-shirts. And that's kind of what Partie is trying for with technology. We're trying to skip over the launchers that gatekeep. We're trying to skip over the platforms that gatekeep. And there's a lot of money for everybody. There's a lot of time for everybody. There's a lot of creative inspiration for everybody. But the fear of not being able and not wanting to do it yourself, and that prom analogy kind of coming back full circle, is find the people to collaborate with. If Partie can help break a game, please reach out to me directly. Same thing with Faze. I think I don't want to speak for you, but like see a lot of opportunity for Faze to start to incubate their own products that way. You know, and if you guys are familiar with the Faze founders, their foresight is brilliant. Say what you want, right? Like they have predicted trends, they've created trends in ways that nobody else has. But with that comes, obviously, the windfall, right? So that's what I'd like to
Would this be your final thoughts?
This is my final thought.
Amazing. So, Erik, what are your final thoughts about this topic?
My final thoughts. I mean, look, we debated this. We debated this a bit, and I've got mixed things on the revenue ownership tied to the game. We talked about that a little bit. I think that, you know, I like open ecosystems, and I get concerned when you go too far down a monetary path that it starts to close the ecosystem a bit. And I'll go back to Valve as an example. It's like, you know, they debated with people about whether coaches should be allowed to stand behind because that's an advantage for a certain team that can afford a coach, right? And it's little things like that. And so I think you just have to be a little careful, or it can run amok a bit. So that's the only thing, and at least from my perspective. I would say I'm excited to see what comes out of this from a personal standpoint because, and I like narrative-driven games personally. I don't mind going on and playing like Mobile Legends Bang Bang on my phone, something that's easy to hop into if I want to tilt, you know, and get really like worked up and compete. But overall, like I want to see more of the things that you can do with the technology that maybe somebody hadn't thought of before. Okay. And there's stuff that, you know, I'll use Portals as an example. The tech to make Portals the game technically was around a lot earlier. It's just someone was like, hey, I want to think a little differently, which is what made that game amazing at the time. And then there's tech that didn't exist, like some of the netcode and things that we can do with games like, you know, all the BR games, right? Like that didn't exist or it was janky 20 years ago, right? And so like there's probably stuff that we can't do yet, and it's cool, and someone will unlock that. You go 30 years ago, and they were figuring out how to make multiplayer work over the internet, right? Or maybe a little more than 30 years ago. So it's that's the part I'm excited about, right? Okay. And I don't know what I don't know, you know. So
would you say that Web3 gaming and this ecosystem will help actually maybe monetize esports better or create secondary markets?
I think it could. Yeah, I mean, they were talking about Axie Infinity earlier, and I think there is an interesting thing there with like hiring trainers and having people work on certain things like in-game. That game itself wasn't quite there fully, but again, it's early, right? I'm not going to go and judge a 80s pixel game against the fidelity of a modern game, right? Just doesn't make any sense. Okay. So yes, I think there's a lot of monetization opportunities.
So it could be.
But like I said, I'm a little I'm
You're
watching
a little concerned.
It. Yeah.
Cautiously interested.
Cautiously interested.
But we could say that the monetization or the structure of possibilities that some of these technical blockchains apply to games that we already love in an invisible way. It might secure transaction. It might allow those things for games that the audience and the player might never know. We just have a new tool that allows those things.
Yeah.
Just to work better.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that goes back to the whole thing. Make a fun game. You know, obscure a lot of the tech, I think, behind it. And because the game will sell itself then. You don't have to sell it based on the tech. Like, again, I don't know what it was like 30 years ago when people were marketing, but I doubt they were like, hey, this is an internet-ready game. Maybe they did. I don't know. But it's likely it was, hey, this is fun. These multiplayer you can play with your friends, right? So, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. Carra, bring it home. You have the last 1 minute and a half.
Yeah, so this is actually somewhat related. As an investor, I look for new markets and new opportunities, not just in gaming. And I think one thing that is really special about games is that they're simulations of life. They're simulations of how people participate, how they cooperate, how they self-organize. And that has taught us a lot about humans over time. It's like this incredibly high complexity thing. And that's one of the reasons why my partner says, like, the things that will be the most important technologies often start out looking like toys. So, for example, like, because games were so expensive computationally to make, people made GPUs for them. But now GPUs are the back of all of scientific computing, including AI, especially AI, right? So, like, all of AI rests on the back of, like, people who are playing Counter-Strike. And I think that there's a lot of really interesting opportunities there, too, right? So, like, what are some primitives about blockchains that we can test in games that will tell us something about the real world, or that will create real world opportunities? And like some things that are somewhat obvious to me are simulation of governance, right? There's like when you own something, you can vote on chain. So there's some sort of like, okay, it's actually really hard to innovate on like governments because it requires civilizations to like fall. But civilizations rise and fall in video games all the time. Can you innovate on political systems in a game in a way that like does not destroy entire nations? Maybe. The same is true of like monetary policy. You can't run double-blind experiments in a real economy because you can't test counterfactuals in real economies, but you can in games. And so there's a lot of really interesting stuff with like, you know, simulation of monetary policy, simulation of governance, simulation of defense and warfare strategy, human-agent interaction. So that's sort of like what I'm excited about with games. It's like, it's not just games, it's everything.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, ETHDenver, for having us. And yeah, have a lovely day, everybody. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you for your help.